Bishop of Ancrea, who was a loyal friend and colleague of Athanasius. He even went into exile with Athanasius at one time. That's very interesting. He argued that the Logos could not possibly be an eternal divine being. He was only a quality or potential inherent within God. As it stood, the Nicene formula could be accused of tritheism, the belief that there were three gods, Father, Son, and Spirit. Instead of the controversial homoousion, Marcellus proposed the compromise term homoiousion, of like or similar nature. Well, the tortuous nature of this debate has often excited ridicule, notably by Gibbon, the great historian, who found it absurd that Christian unity should have been threatened by a mere diphthong. I love that. Christian unity threatened by a mere diphthong. But it was, indeed. It was an amazing thing. To an outsider, these theological arguments inevitably seemed a waste of time. Nobody could possibly prove anything definitively, one way or the other, and the dispute proved to be simply divisive, and boy, it did. It blew Christianity completely apart. It's astonishing how the early church fathers wrote hundreds, thousands of letters. We have several hundred ourselves, back and forth, arguing and complaining and griping, and it was amazing. Traitors to everybody. Unfortunately, however, a dogmatic intolerance was creeping into Christianity, which would ultimately make the adoption of the correct or the orthodox symbols crucial and obligatory. This doctrinal obsession, which was unique to Christianity, could easily lead to a confusion between the human symbol and the divine reality. Very interesting how she puts that. Well, I want to... In Robin Lane Fox's book, Pagans and Christians, he says some interesting things about Constantine that I want to share with you. Kind of help us understand the spirit of the times as well as the people's attitude. It's remarkably confirmed in the reading of the church fathers themselves. The internal life of the church. This is on page 663 here. He says, Constantine's generosity did not lead Christians off a former path of virtue. It intensified vices which already exist. Nor did his involvement split the church for the first time. This had already happened before. In the West, Constantine delegated the Donatist dispute to bishops' arbitration. He ended by involving himself and his agents. In the East, the role of the emperor and his agents was more positive throughout. The emperor's criminal sentences against Christians at Nicaea were followed by church councils at which his own court advisors presided as servants of Christ. The emperor wished only to bring about Christian unity. This was his idea. The Christians first involved then frustrated his efforts to becoming unified. At Nicaea, Christians were said to have begun the council by piling the emperor's lap with petitions against fellow Christians. You know what the emperor did with all those complaints? He burned them in front of the council. He took all of the complaints, the gripes, the moanings and groanings, the bitter weeping and wailing, the pointing of fingers, and he torched the whole group. And he said, okay, now, let's get this petty crap behind us, and let's get on with the real business here. See, the bishops were so petty, were so enmeshed with their own self-importance that they couldn't see past the forest for the trees. It's a fascinating thing to read about. Well, after Nicaea, charges of criminal misconduct continued to be advanced by one Christian party against the leader of another Christian party, and Constantine struggled with the results. These councils' common concerns are unmistakable. Interference by one priest or bishop in another's spheres of authority. This is on page 665 of Fox's book. Money lending by clerics, gross complexities in Christians' sex lives. Overachievers castrate themselves voluntarily, where pseudo-perfectionists claim to be living as brothers and sisters with the virgins in their house, and where the majority gamble and go to the games. They use sorcery and divination. They pursue each other's wives, or they ask a Jew to bless the crops. Over them presided bishops who damned the theater, the races and paintings inside church, who forbade women to write or receive letters in their own name, and who were aware that Christians' wives might be coaxed into lending their finest dresses for a procession of the pagans' gods. Others simply joined the sinners, lending money, sleeping with the virgins and widows, and laying slanderous documents against fellow members of the church. The prime obstacle to Christianization lay in the Christians themselves, in their clergy as much as their ordinary followers. A double standard had always been present in Christian ethics, and Constantine became entrenched with it in civil life. That is essentially the basic problem that is occurring within Christianity. As Hugh Nibley so aptly put it in his book, Apostles and Bishops in Early Christianity, the real issue at Nicaea, in both the East and the West, the Arian controversy, was merely an aspect of the great struggle for episcopal priority. He says this on page 107 and 108. It is not a contest between theologians, but between bishops. And the issue is not doctrine, but power. The cause of the Nicene Creed, the cause of the actual gathering of the Nicene group, was not doctrine. It was jealousy and ambition. Was the nature of the Trinity the real issue at Nicaea? Not for a moment. This is a very trivial technical question according to the letter of the emperor I just read to you. He didn't care about it. He didn't even think it was consequential. He said, keep this kind of silly stuff in your own minds. You're causing way too many problems over something that is absolutely ridiculously trivial. It contains nothing of salvation for mankind. And here was the problem. Here was the attitude, as Robin Lane Fox just noted, between the bishops. Nibley notes on page 109. This Alexander, Bishop Eusebius of Nicodemia, wrote to as many bishops as would read and subscribe to his idea. This Alexander thinks the whole world depends on his nod. The nature of the Godhead is for him merely a pretext to gain power. He has been working against us for years. Don't have anything to do with him. If you meet any of his supporters in the street, look the other way. Don't defile yourselves by wishing them to have a good day. In reply to these sentiments, Alexander spilled the beans. This Eusebius is all ambition. You see the feel here? The feel here is not interest in the church as such in any way, shape, or form. The whole point is power, jealousy, and ambition. So with this idea, I want to continue exploring more of the Arian controversy and discuss more of the, and I do want to discuss the actual, the doctrinal feel and the various arguments back and forth with the doctrine as well. But the introduction of new non-scriptural doctrines such as the creation ex nihilo, way past the time of Jesus. I mean, we're talking 300 years later. And this constant bickering and sedition and tyranny, and they anathemize each other all the time. If someone thinks this instead of that, let him be anathema. I mean, you can read that in Basil and Eusebius and in the letters back and forth between Gregory of Nazianzen, and it is astonishing how often they would rather damn each other than bless each other. And it tore the church apart. So thank you for joining me in this Backyard Professor podcast series. I'll continue on in the next podcast with more on the background and the idea of the Arian controversy on the Nicene Creed. In the meantime, remember, have a great life.